Remove him from the building. The words echoed through the grand auditorium, and for a moment, no one noticed the quiet single dad standing near the back of the room. No one knew that the sleek silver concept car glowing beneath the stage lights had once existed only in his garage. No one knew that the billionaire accepting applause from hundreds of guests had built his newest empire on a dream that did not belong to him. And before the night was over, the truth would begin its slow journey into the light. The Langford Motors Innovation Center buzzed with excitement as guests filled every seat inside the massive venue just outside Detroit, Michigan. Journalists adjusted cameras. Investors exchanged confident smiles. Industry executives sipped sparkling water beneath enormous digital displays, counting down to the reveal of what the media had already labeled the future of American transportation. The air carried that unmistakable feeling of anticipation, the kind that made people sit straighter and speak more softly. At the center of it all stood Victor Langford. Tall, polished, and impossibly confident, the billionaire CEO smiled as photographers captured every angle. His tailored navy suit fit perfectly. His silver cufflinks reflected the bright stage lights. To the world, Victor Langford represented success, vision, innovation, the American dream. But standing nearly 70 feet away near the rear entrance was a man who saw something very different. Nathan Cole shifted uncomfortably in his worn brown jacket. He wasn't supposed to be there. At least, that's what the security staff believed. His hands rested quietly in his pockets as his eyes remained fixed on the vehicle hidden beneath a black silk cover. Beside him hung a laminated visitor badge that no one had bothered to check twice. He wasn't famous. He wasn't wealthy. He wasn't important enough for anyone to recognize. And that was exactly why nobody paid attention to him. Nathan glanced down at his phone. A message from his daughter waited on the screen. "Good luck today, Dad. I know they'll listen this time." A faint smile touched his face. Emily always believed, even when nobody else did. Especially when nobody else did. He typed a short response. "Love you, kiddo." Then he slipped the phone away. Across the auditorium, the countdown clock reached 30 seconds. The crowd grew quiet. Conversations faded. Cameras rose into position. A deep voice filled the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the founder and CEO of Langford Motors, Mr. Victor Langford." Thunderous applause erupted instantly. Victor stepped onto the stage with practiced confidence. He thanked investors. He thanked engineers. He thanked partners and supporters. Then he paused dramatically before placing one hand on the covered vehicle. "For years," he said, "our team has worked toward a single goal, creating a transportation platform unlike anything the world has ever seen." More applause followed. Nathan remained silent. His heartbeat quickened. "Tonight," Victor continued, "I am proud to introduce the Langford Horizon." The silk cover dropped away. Gasps filled the room. The silver vehicle gleamed beneath the lights. Its aerodynamic curves seemed almost sculpted by the wind itself. The audience immediately rose to its feet. Journalists hurried forward. Investors exchanged amazed expressions. Some people even applauded before they fully understood what they were seeing. Nathan felt the air leave his lungs. Every line, every curve, every design feature. It was all there. The distinctive front architecture, the revolutionary battery cooling channels, the unique body geometry he had spent nearly 4 years developing at a folding workbench inside a small garage behind his modest home. He remembered winter nights when the temperature dropped below freezing. He remembered sketching ideas while Emily slept in the next room. He remembered fixing engines during the day and designing the future after midnight. Every sacrifice, every sleepless hour, every impossible hope. Now they sat beneath stage lights while another man accepted the credit. "This breakthrough," Victor announced proudly, "represents the most important achievement of my career." The crowd erupted again. Nathan lowered his eyes. Not because he was angry, not because he wanted revenge, but because hearing those words hurt more than he expected. Nearby, 2 security guards exchanged glances. One pointed toward Nathan. The other nodded. They began walking in his direction. Nathan saw them approaching. He already knew what was coming. Around him, hundreds of people celebrated a billionaire's brilliance. None of them realized the real story had just walked into the room. And as the first security guard reached for his shoulder, a single thought passed quietly through Nathan Cole's mind. The truth had been ignored for 2 years. But truths have a way of surviving. Nathan did not argue when the security guards approached. He did not raise his voice. He did not point toward the stage or demand that anyone listen. One guard offered an apologetic smile. The other gestured politely toward the exit. "Sir, we are going to need you to leave." Nathan nodded once. "Of course." The guard seemed surprised by how calmly he accepted it. Most people protested. Most people demanded explanations. Nathan simply turned and walked away. Behind him, applause thundered through the auditorium as Victor Langford continued accepting praise from investors and reporters. Ahead of him, the glass doors reflected a man who looked exactly like what everyone assumed he was. Just another ordinary father in a worn jacket. Just another face nobody remembered. Outside, the late afternoon air felt cooler than before. Nathan crossed the parking lot without looking back. His pickup truck sat near the far edge of the property, older than most of the vehicles surrounding it. The faded blue paint had seen better days. The driver's side door squeaked slightly whenever it opened. Emily always joked that the truck had more character than half the people on television. The memory brought a small smile to his face. He climbed inside and started the engine. The radio automatically came to life with excited coverage of the unveiling. Industry experts are calling the horizon a revolutionary leap forward, one commentator announced. Nathan reached over and switched it off. Silence filled the cab. For a moment, he simply sat there watching the enormous Langford motors building through the windshield. The sun reflected across its glass exterior like a monument to success. 2 years earlier, he had walked through those same doors carrying a cardboard portfolio filled with sketches and prototype calculations. Back then, he still believed hard work was enough. Back then, he still believed someone would look at his ideas before looking at his bank account. The drive home took nearly 40 minutes. The farther he traveled from downtown Detroit, the smaller the buildings became. Corporate towers gave way to warehouses. Warehouses gave way to modest neighborhoods lined with aging trees and weathered fences. Eventually, Nathan turned onto a narrow residential street where children rode bicycles beneath the fading evening light. His home stood near the end of the block. It was not large. It was not impressive, but it was theirs. The small white house had survived countless Michigan winters, and somehow so had the family living inside it. Before Nathan even reached the front porch, the front door flew open. "Dad!" Emily raced outside with the energy only a 10-year-old could possess. Her blonde ponytail bounced as she hurried down the walkway. Nathan barely had time to step out of the truck before she wrapped her arms around him. "How did it go?" she asked. Nathan hesitated, just for a second. Then he smiled. It was a long day. Emily studied his face carefully. She had inherited her mother's ability to notice things other people missed. "That bad?" she asked softly. Nathan shrugged. "Let us just say nobody invited me onto the stage." Emily frowned. "Their loss." Nathan laughed quietly. "You always know what to say." Together they walked into the house. The smell of tomato soup drifted from the kitchen. Family photos covered the walls. School drawings hung from the refrigerator. Nothing about the place suggested innovation or groundbreaking engineering. Yet hidden behind the house stood the place where everything had begun. After dinner, Emily finished her homework at the kitchen table while Nathan stepped into the garage. The familiar scent of machine oil and metal greeted him immediately. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Shelves held years of tools, spare parts, and unfinished ideas. At the far end of the garage stood an old wooden workbench. The surface was worn smooth from thousands of hours of use. Nathan ran his hand across it gently. Here was where the Rayall story lived. Not in corporate presentations. Not in billion-dollar headquarters. Here, he looked toward the wall covered with sketches. Early concepts. Engineering notes. Handwritten calculations. Some pages were yellowed with age. Others contained coffee stains from nights that stretched past midnight. For nearly 4 years, Nathan had followed the same routine. Work all day repairing vehicles. Come home. Help Emily with school. Make dinner. Pay bills. Then return to the garage after she fell asleep. While most of the neighborhood rested, he worked beneath these lights, chasing an idea nobody else could see. He remembered countless winter nights when snow piled against the garage door. He remembered wearing 2 jackets because the heater could barely keep up with the cold. He remembered questioning himself more times than he could count. But every morning, the dream remained waiting on the workbench. And so he kept going. A soft voice interrupted his thoughts. "You are thinking about it again." Nathan turned. Emily stood in the doorway holding 2 mugs of hot chocolate. Maybe, he admitted. She handed him one and looked toward the sketches covering the walls. You know, she said, I still think people are going to find out someday. Nathan stared at the designs in silence. The garage lights cast long shadows across the papers. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees. Inside, everything felt still. Maybe, he said quietly. Emily smiled. Not maybe. She looked directly at him. Definitely. Nathan did not answer right away. But somewhere deep inside that little garage, beneath years of disappointment and silence, a tiny spark refused to go out. The next morning arrived with a gray Michigan sky and the steady rhythm of ordinary life. Nathan dropped Emily off at school just after 8 o'clock. She waved from the sidewalk before disappearing through the front doors with her backpack bouncing against her shoulders. Nathan waited until she was safely inside before driving toward the repair shop where he worked. The day passed like most others. Oil changes, brake inspections, engine diagnostics. Customers came and went without realizing that the quiet mechanic tightening bolts beneath a pickup truck had once carried an idea capable of changing an entire industry. Nathan preferred it that way. Recognition had never been his goal. Building something meaningful had been. Around noon, while organizing parts in the back storage room, his eyes landed on an old cardboard box sitting on the highest shelf. He froze. Dust covered the corners. A faded shipping label hung loosely from one side. Slowly, he climbed a ladder and brought it down. His hands brushed away years of dust. Inside were copies of the documents that had changed everything. Engineering sketches, technical specifications, prototype renderings, business proposals. Every page represented a chapter of a dream that once felt possible. And as he turned the first page, memories pulled him backward 2 years. Back then, the garage behind his house had looked much the same, but Nathan had carried something he no longer allowed himself to feel quite as often. Hope. He remembered the evening clearly. Emily sat at the workbench coloring pictures while Nathan reviewed the final presentation package for what felt like the 100th time. Do you think they will like it? Emily had asked. Nathan smiled. I hope so. What if they love it? She asked. Then maybe something wonderful happens. Emily grinned. I like wonderful. The next morning Nathan had driven downtown, carrying a portfolio case that contained 4 years of work. Langford Motors occupied an entire city block. Glass walls reflected the skyline. Employees moved through the lobby with purpose. Everything about the building communicated success. Nathan remembered feeling slightly out of place as he stepped through the revolving doors. At reception, he explained that he had been invited to present a private transportation concept through the company's Independent Innovation Review program. To his surprise, the invitation had been genuine. An assistant escorted him upstairs. A conference room overlooked the city from nearly 30 floors above the street. Minutes later, several executives entered. Among them was Victor Langford himself. Nathan still remembered the confidence Victor carried. The billionaire shook his hand warmly. Nathan Cole, Victor said. I have heard intriguing things about your submission. Nathan felt encouraged immediately. For nearly 2 hours he walked the room through every detail. He explained efficiency systems, safety architecture, manufacturing possibilities, future scalability. The executives asked questions. Nathan answered them carefully. Victor listened more than he spoke. Occasionally he smiled and nodded. By the end of the meeting, Nathan felt something he had not experienced in years. Validation. This is impressive work, Victor had said while reviewing one of the final renderings. Very impressive. Nathan could still hear those words. He remembered driving home afterward with both hands gripping the steering wheel because he could not stop smiling. For the first time in years, the future seemed larger than his garage, larger than unpaid bills, larger than survival. That evening he told Emily everything. She celebrated as if they had already won. They ordered pizza, watched a movie, laughed about what color they would paint the house someday. Then came the waiting. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. Nathan checked his email every morning before work and every evening before bed. Eventually the response arrived. Thank you for your submission. After careful review, we have decided not to proceed with the project. Nathan remembered reading the message 3 times. The rejection felt strangely cold. Generic. Final. There was no explanation. No discussion. No follow-up questions. Just a polite dismissal. Emily had found him sitting quietly at the kitchen table. What happened? She asked. Nathan forced a smile. Looks like they are going another direction. Emily studied him for a moment. That does not mean it was not a good idea. Nathan remembered reaching across the table and squeezing her hand. No, he said softly. It does not. Back in the storage room, Nathan closed the box and stared at the papers in silence. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Somewhere beyond the walls of the repair shop, the world continued celebrating Victor Langford's latest breakthrough. But now, holding those documents again, Nathan noticed something he had ignored for 2 years. On the top folder sat a company stamp from Langford Motors. Beneath it was a handwritten set of initials he had never seen before. And for the first time since the rejection arrived, a question entered his mind. What if someone inside had known exactly what they were doing? The handwritten initials stayed in Nathan's thoughts long after his shift ended. They followed him through traffic lights, through grocery store aisles, through the quiet drive home beneath a sky painted with fading shades of orange and gray. Most people would have let it go. Most people would have convinced themselves it meant nothing. But something about those 2 letters felt different. Not because they proved anything, because they suggested someone else had once touched the truth. That evening, Emily sat at the kitchen table working on a science project while Nathan prepared dinner. The sound of pencils scratching paper mixed with the gentle simmer of soup on the stove. It was an ordinary moment, the kind that never appeared in magazines or television commercials, yet somehow mattered more than any corporate celebration. "You are thinking again," Emily said without looking up. Nathan smiled. "Am I that obvious?" "Only when your eyebrows do that thing." "What thing?" "The serious thing." Nathan laughed softly. "Maybe I am thinking." Emily finally looked up from her project. "About the car?" Nathan hesitated. Then he nodded. "A little." Emily studied him carefully. "You know what Mom used to say?" The mention of her mother always carried a quiet tenderness. "What was that?" Nathan asked. "Truth takes longer than lies because it has to walk instead of run." Nathan smiled. "That sounds exactly like her." After dinner, Emily went upstairs while Nathan stepped into the garage. The old workbench stood exactly where it always had. The sketches remained pinned to the walls. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead. Yet tonight the room felt different. Not because anything had changed. Because for the first time in 2 years, Nathan found himself opening the old project files again. One folder became 2. 2 became 10. Soon papers covered nearly every inch of the workbench. Engineering timelines, prototype calculations, submission records, email confirmations. Every document carried dates. Every date told a story. Nathan worked quietly for nearly 3 hours. Outside, darkness settled across the neighborhood. Most houses switched off their lights one by one. But inside the garage, a single lamp remained glowing. As midnight approached, Nathan finally leaned back in his chair. The evidence was still the same. He had designed everything. He had submitted everything. Yet none of it changed reality. Victor Langford remained a celebrated billionaire. Nathan remained a mechanic. The world had already chosen which story it preferred. He began placing documents back into storage boxes when his hand paused over an old email printout. His eyes narrowed. There, attached to one of the correspondence chains, was a name he had nearly forgotten. Claire Bennett, Senior Engineering Review Division. Nathan remembered the meeting immediately. Claire had been one of the executives present during his presentation. Unlike the others, she had taken extensive notes. She had asked thoughtful questions. More importantly, she had seemed genuinely interested in the technical details. Nathan stared at the name for several seconds. Then he folded the page and slipped it into his jacket pocket. The next morning arrived cold and rainy. At Langford Motors headquarters, hundreds of employees moved through another busy day. The company's stock continued climbing after the successful launch event. Reporters praised the innovation. Analysts predicted record profits. Success seemed unstoppable. Yet on the 31st floor, Claire Bennett sat alone inside her office reviewing engineering reports. At 42 years old, she had spent nearly 2 decades building her reputation as one of the most respected engineers in the automotive industry. She valued precision, facts, accountability, which was exactly why something had been bothering her ever since the unveiling. A notification appeared on her computer screen. New media coverage of the Horizon platform. Claire clicked the article. The familiar images filled the monitor. She studied the vehicle again. Then she noticed something. A small design feature located beneath the rear cooling assembly. Most people would never recognize it. Most engineers would overlook it entirely. Claire did not. Her expression changed. Slowly, she zoomed in on the image. Then closer still. A memory surfaced. A conference room. A nervous, independent inventor. Hand-drawn schematics. A specific design solution unlike anything she had seen before. Claire sat perfectly still. Outside her office window, rain tapped gently against the glass. Inside, a quiet unease began growing stronger. She opened the company archive system and entered a search request. Hundreds of project files appeared instantly. Claire stared at the screen. Then she whispered for words she never expected to say. Where have I seen this? And somewhere across the city, without knowing it, Nathan Cole and Claire Bennett had just taken the first steps toward the same truth. Claire Bennett had spent her entire career trusting evidence more than assumptions. Evidence did not care about popularity. Evidence did not care about status. Evidence simply existed. And that was exactly why she could not stop thinking about the design feature hidden beneath the rear cooling assembly. By 8 o'clock the following morning, she was already seated at her desk with a cup of untouched coffee cooling beside her keyboard. The engineering archive system stretched across multiple internal databases containing decades of development records. Most employees only accessed the files necessary for their current projects. Claire began digging much deeper. Search results filled her monitor. Hundreds of project folders. Thousands of engineering revisions. She refined the filters. Narrowed the dates. Cross-referenced design elements. Minutes became hours. Outside her office, employees moved through another busy workday. Inside, Claire remained focused. Finally, a file appeared. Independent Innovation Submission. Nathan Cole. The name immediately triggered recognition. She clicked. The folder opened. Claire felt her pulse quicken. There it was. The exact cooling architecture. The same energy distribution pattern. The same structural solution she had seen unveiled before millions of viewers just days earlier. She opened another file. Then another. Each revealed more similarities. None of this automatically proved wrongdoing. Similar ideas occasionally emerged independently. Engineering history was filled with coincidences. Yet something felt wrong. The deeper she looked, the more uncomfortable she became. A timestamp attached to one document showed that Nathan's original submission had entered the system nearly 2 years before Horizon development officially began. Claire leaned back slowly. Rain clouds drifted beyond the office windows. The city skyline appeared muted beneath the gray morning light. She opened the employee review history associated with the submission. Several names appeared. Analysts, coordinators, engineering assistants. Then she found the initials Nathan had unknowingly discovered inside his own files. D.R. Claire recognized the name immediately. Daniel Rhodes, former senior project coordinator. Daniel had resigned 18 months earlier after accepting a position with another technology company. Claire stared at the screen. Something inside her shifted. Not certainty. Suspicion. A quiet suspicion grounded in facts rather than emotion. Meanwhile, across town, Nathan's life continued exactly as it always had. He spent the morning replacing brake components on an aging SUV. He spent lunch helping a younger mechanic diagnose an electrical issue. He spent the afternoon balancing customer expectations against repair budgets. Ordinary work. Honest work. The kind of work that rarely made headlines, but kept communities moving. Around 3 o'clock, his phone vibrated. Emily had sent a photograph from school. Her science project stood proudly on display inside the gymnasium. First place. Nathan smiled immediately. A second message followed. Told you today would be a good day. Nathan laughed quietly and replied, Congratulations, kiddo. I am proud of you. Emily's response arrived seconds later. I learned it from you. Nathan slipped the phone back into his pocket. The message stayed with him long after the screen went dark. Sometimes success looked very different from what the world celebrated. Back at Langford Motors, Claire continued reviewing records. By late afternoon, she had assembled a timeline. Submission dates, internal review logs, development milestones, employee access histories. Individually, none of the information appeared alarming. Together, however, the pattern became increasingly difficult to ignore. Then she found something unexpected. An archived internal memo. The document had never been distributed publicly. Most employees probably never knew it existed. Claire opened the file. Her eyes scanned the first paragraph, then the second. Suddenly, she sat forward. The memo referenced a strategic development meeting held just 3 weeks after Nathan's presentation. One attendee stood out immediately: Victor Langford. Another detail stood out even more. Attached to the memo was a recommendation to transfer selected concepts from independent innovation reviews into advanced development evaluation. Claire read the sentence twice, then a third time. The language remained carefully written. Corporate. Professional. Yet beneath the polished wording, a troubling possibility emerged. Someone had not rejected Nathan's ideas immediately. Someone had moved them deeper into the system. Claire closed her eyes for a moment. She had worked beside Victor Langford for years. She respected his accomplishments. She respected the company. She respected the thousands of employees whose livelihoods depended on its success. But respect did not eliminate questions. And questions were beginning to multiply. As evening approached, Claire gathered copies of the most relevant records onto a secure drive. She hesitated before locking her office. Most people would stop there. Most people would decide it was not their responsibility. Yet something about Nathan's submission lingered in her mind. Not because of the engineering, because of the principle. Because somewhere in the process, a quiet inventor appeared to have lost ownership of his own story. As she walked toward the parking garage, her phone buzzed with an incoming message from a former colleague now working in investigative journalism. Ryan Foster. The two had stayed in occasional contact over the years. The message was brief. Looking for a story worth chasing. Seen anything interesting lately? Claire stopped walking. The evening air felt cool against her face as she stared at the screen. Cars rolled past. Office lights flickered on across the city. For several long seconds, she said nothing. Then she typed a response. Maybe. The message contained only one word. But for the first time since the unveiling, the truth was no longer sitting quietly in the dark. Ryan Foster had built his reputation on a simple principle. When everyone agreed on a story too quickly, he started asking questions. That philosophy had earned him awards, enemies, and more than a few sleepless nights. It had also taught him that the most important truths rarely announced themselves. They hid inside overlooked details, waiting for someone patient enough to notice them. The morning after Claire's message, Ryan sat inside a quiet coffee shop overlooking the Detroit River. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Commuters hurried past carrying umbrellas and briefcases. Across from him sat Claire Bennett, her expression calm but serious. Between them rested a tablet containing a carefully organized collection of documents. "Tell me why this matters," Ryan said. Claire folded her hands. "Because the timeline does not make sense." Ryan listened as she walked him through the records. Submission dates, review logs, internal project transfers, archived engineering notes. She never exaggerated, never speculated beyond what the documents supported. That alone captured Ryan's attention. Most sources arrived carrying conclusions. Claire arrived carrying evidence. By the time she finished, Ryan was staring at the screen in silence. "You are saying this inventor submitted these concepts almost 2 years before the company announced development?" Claire nodded. "That is what the records show." "And the similarities?" "Too specific to ignore." Ryan leaned back slowly. Outside, a freighter moved across the gray water. Inside, neither spoke for several moments. Finally, Ryan asked the question that mattered most. "Who was the inventor?" Claire looked down at the file. "Nathan Cole." Meanwhile, Nathan spent Saturday morning exactly as he spent most weekends. He repaired a neighbor's pickup truck for half of what the job normally cost. He helped an elderly customer understand a repair estimate. He stopped at a grocery store where 3 different people greeted him by name. None of them knew anything about corporate scandals or engineering submissions. They knew him as the man who always volunteered when someone needed help. Around noon, Nathan and Emily visited a local community center hosting a school fundraiser. Children ran between booths. Parents carried trays of homemade desserts. Laughter drifted through the warm spring air. Emily proudly showed off her science project ribbon to anyone willing to look. Nathan stood nearby smiling. For a few hours, life felt wonderfully simple. At Langford Motors, however, things were becoming increasingly complicated. Claire continued searching company archives during spare moments between meetings. The deeper she looked, the clearer the pattern became. Certain files had been accessed repeatedly by Daniel Rhodes before his departure. Several internal references connected those accesses to later development discussions. Then Claire discovered something she had not expected. A backup archive containing presentation materials prepared for executive review nearly 2 years earlier. Her hands tightened slightly on the mouse. She opened the folder. Slide after slide appeared. Technical summaries, concept evaluations, strategic opportunities. Then she found it. Embedded within the presentation was a rendering nearly identical to one Nathan had submitted. The date attached to the file predated the official Horizon project by months. Claire stared at the screen. Her heart beat faster. Not because the discovery was dramatic, because it was undeniable. Across town, Ryan began his own investigation. Public records, patent filings, archived interviews, industry reports. Every source revealed another piece of the puzzle. He called former employees. Most declined comment. One agreed to speak anonymously. The conversation lasted only 6 minutes. Yet one statement stayed with Ryan long afterward. A lot of ideas moved around during those years, the former employee said. More than people realized. By Sunday evening, Ryan's notebook contained pages of observations, questions, leads, connections. Still, he was not ready to publish anything. Not yet. Facts mattered. Accuracy mattered. Reputation mattered. The story needed to be strong enough to survive scrutiny. Late that night, as Nathan organized tools inside his garage, his phone rang unexpectedly. The number was unfamiliar. He almost ignored it. Almost. Instead, he answered. Hello. A calm voice responded. Mr. Cole, my name is Ryan Foster. I am an investigative journalist. I believe we need to talk about the designs you submitted to Langford Motors. Nathan stood completely still. The garage suddenly felt quieter than before. Outside, the wind moved gently through the trees. Inside, years of silence seemed to gather around a single moment. Ryan continued carefully. I think someone owes you the truth. For the first time in a very long time, Nathan did not know what to say. The garage remained silent for several seconds after Ryan Foster finished speaking. Nathan stood beside his workbench holding the phone against his ear while the familiar hum of fluorescent lights filled the space around him. For years he had imagined what it might feel like if someone finally listened. Strangely, now that the moment had arrived, he felt less excitement than caution. How did you get my number? Nathan asked quietly. Ryan did not hesitate. Through public records and a lot of persistence. Nathan almost smiled. That sounded exactly like something an investigative reporter would say. And why are you calling me? Ryan glanced at the notes spread across his desk. Because I think your story is bigger than you realize. Nathan looked across the garage at the wall covered in sketches. For a long moment, he said nothing. Finally, he replied, I am not interested in revenge. Ryan paused. Most people started with anger. Most people wanted payback. Nathan's answer immediately told him something important about the man behind the story. Good, Ryan said. Neither am I. I am interested in facts. The following afternoon, they met at a small diner outside downtown Detroit. Rain clouds drifted overhead, casting soft shadows across the parking lot. The restaurant smelled faintly of coffee and fresh bread. Ryan arrived first. Nathan entered a few minutes later carrying a worn leather folder. They shook hands and sat down. What followed was not an interview. It was a conversation. Nathan described the years spent developing the concept. The late nights in the garage. The presentation at Langford Motors. The rejection email. The unveiling event. Ryan listened carefully, interrupting only to clarify dates or verify details. Throughout the discussion, Nathan never exaggerated, never dramatized, never portrayed himself as a victim. That alone impressed Ryan. Do you know what surprises me? Ryan asked near the end of the meeting. Nathan shook his head. You never tried to force the issue. Nathan stirred his coffee thoughtfully. What would that have accomplished? Ryan raised an eyebrow. Nathan smiled faintly. A man with a garage and a daughter does not usually win against a corporation worth billions. Ryan leaned back in his chair. Then why keep all the records? Nathan glanced toward the window. Because truth matters even when nobody is looking. Those words stayed with Ryan long after the meeting ended. That evening, he shared the conversation with Claire. They met inside a quiet office after business hours while most employees had already gone home. Claire reviewed additional archive records while Ryan updated his notes. Together, they continued assembling the timeline piece by piece. One document led to another. One email led to another. The pattern kept growing clearer. Yet the most surprising development came from somewhere neither expected. 3 days later, Ryan received an anonymous message. No name. No explanation. Attached was a single file. Inside the file sat a copy of an internal meeting agenda from nearly 2 years earlier. The title immediately caught his attention. Strategic Innovation Integration Review. Ryan called Claire within minutes. They examined the document together. Listed among the discussion topics was a reference number matching Nathan's original submission package. Claire felt her stomach tighten. Ryan stared at the screen. Neither spoke. The evidence was becoming difficult to dismiss. Meanwhile, life continued normally for Nathan. He attended Emily's school assembly. He repaired transmissions. He paid utility bills. He helped Emily practice for an upcoming spelling competition. To anyone watching from the outside, nothing appeared unusual. Yet one evening, as father and daughter sat together on the back porch watching the sunset, Emily asked a question that caught him completely off guard. "Dad, yeah. If everybody eventually learns the truth, what happens then?" Nathan looked toward the horizon, where golden sunlight stretched across the neighborhood rooftops. He considered the question carefully. "I do not know." Emily nodded slowly. "Will you be famous?" Nathan laughed. "Definitely not." "Will you be rich?" "Probably not." Emily thought for a moment. Then she asked the question that mattered most. "Then why does it matter?" Nathan fell silent. The evening breeze moved gently through the trees. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked. A lawn sprinkler clicked rhythmically across fresh grass. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary moments. The kind that often carry extraordinary truths. Finally, Nathan looked at his daughter. "Because someday," he said softly, "you are going to grow up and face situations where doing the right thing is harder than staying quiet." Emily listened carefully. "And?" Nathan smiled. "And I want you to remember that the truth does not need to shout to exist. It only needs someone willing to stand beside it." Emily considered his words. Then she leaned her head against his shoulder. Neither spoke for several minutes. The sky slowly darkened above them. Across the city, Ryan and Claire continued uncovering evidence. Inside corporate offices, old records waited to be discovered. Hidden inside servers and archives, forgotten details remained quietly intact. And although none of them knew it yet, the investigation was approaching a piece of evidence powerful enough to change everything. The breakthrough arrived on a Thursday evening when most of downtown Detroit was settling into the familiar rhythm of rush hour traffic. Ryan Foster sat alone inside his office, surrounded by stacks of documents, printed timelines, and handwritten notes gathered over weeks of investigation. The glow from his computer monitor illuminated the room, while city lights slowly appeared beyond the window. He had reviewed the anonymous file dozens of times. Every detail matched. Every date aligned. Yet something still felt incomplete. The story was close, but not complete. Ryan leaned back and rubbed his eyes. Then his phone vibrated. A new email had arrived from an unknown sender. No subject line. No message. Only a single attachment. Ryan stared at the screen. Experience had taught him to be cautious. It had also taught him that sometimes the most important evidence arrived quietly. He downloaded the file and opened it. What appeared on the screen instantly erased his exhaustion. It was a recording, not audio, video, security footage from an internal conference room nearly 2 years earlier. The timestamp matched the period shortly after Nathan's presentation. Ryan's pulse quickened. He immediately called Claire. 20 minutes later, they sat together watching the footage frame by frame. Executives entered the room. Documents appeared on the conference table. Presentation slides filled a large display screen. Then came the moment that changed everything. One of the slides displayed Nathan's original design rendering. The image was unmistakable. Claire covered her mouth. Ryan froze the frame. The date remained visible in the corner. The room fell silent. Neither needed to speculate anymore. The timeline now had visual confirmation. More importantly, the footage showed that Nathan's concepts had not disappeared after the rejection. They had been reviewed at the highest levels of the company. Ryan spoke first. "This changes everything." Claire nodded slowly. "Yes." The next 72 hours became a blur of verification. Ryan contacted independent experts. Digital analysts confirmed the authenticity of the recording. Legal consultants reviewed the evidence. Additional records were cross-checked against archived corporate data. Every review strengthened the same conclusion. The evidence held. By Monday morning, Ryan's investigative report was ready. It stretched across dozens of pages supported by documents, timelines, technical comparisons, internal records, and authenticated footage. Yet before publication, Ryan made one final phone call. Nathan answered from the repair shop. The familiar sounds of pneumatic tools echoed in the background. "Hello." Ryan took a breath. "It is ready." Nathan remained quiet. "You are sure?" Ryan glanced at the report sitting on his desk. "As sure as I have ever been." Nathan looked across the garage toward a customer waiting near the front counter. Life continued moving around him exactly as it always had. "Then do what you need to do," he said. "Are you prepared for what happens next?" Ryan asked. Nathan smiled faintly. "I spent 2 years believing nothing would happen. I can handle whatever comes now." The story was published the following morning. At first, the response seemed ordinary. A few shares, a few comments, a few industry reactions. Then something shifted. Large media outlets began picking it up. Technology analysts discussed the evidence. Engineering communities started comparing the designs side by side. By noon, the article had become the most viewed investigative report in the country. Television networks requested interviews. Financial commentators debated the implications. Social media exploded with questions. One phrase appeared repeatedly across thousands of posts. Who is Nathan Cole? Inside Langford Motors headquarters, emergency meetings filled the day. Executives reviewed the report. Legal teams examined the evidence. Public relations advisors prepared statements. Yet every hour brought new scrutiny, new analysis, new attention. The facts refused to disappear. By evening, major news networks aired segments summarizing the investigation. The authenticated conference room footage became impossible to ignore. Analysts displayed timestamps. Engineers discussed technical similarities. Former employees began speaking publicly, not with anger, with facts. Across America, millions of viewers watched the story unfold. Meanwhile, Nathan sat at home helping Emily study vocabulary words. His phone had been ringing almost nonstop for hours. Reporters, producers, attorneys, strangers. He ignored nearly all of them. Emily finally looked up from her notebook. "Dad, yeah. Everybody is talking about you." Nathan laughed quietly. "That sounds exhausting." Emily smiled. Then her expression became more serious. "Are you nervous?" Nathan considered the question. Outside, evening shadows stretched across the neighborhood. Inside, the house felt warm and familiar. "Not really," he said. "Why not?" Nathan closed the notebook and looked at his daughter. "Because the truth does not belong to me anymore." Emily frowned slightly. "What does that mean?" Nathan smiled. "It means once people can see it for themselves, I do not have to carry it alone." At that exact moment, less than 20 miles away, Victor Langford stood inside a boardroom surrounded by executives staring at a screen filled with breaking news headlines. The room was silent. Not the silence of confusion. Not the silence of uncertainty. The silence that arrives when facts become impossible to outrun. The days that followed felt strangely quiet. Not because people stopped talking. In many ways, they talked more than ever. News programs continued covering the investigation. Industry analysts debated corporate accountability. Commentators discussed innovation, ownership, and ethics. Yet for Nathan Cole, the noise seemed far away. Every morning, he still drove Emily to school. Every afternoon, he still worked at the repair shop. Every evening, he still sat at the same kitchen table helping with homework. The world had changed around him, but the things that mattered most remained exactly where they had always been. 2 weeks after the story broke, Langford Motors held a public press conference. Journalists packed the auditorium. Cameras lined the back walls. Reporters filled every available seat. Millions watched through live streams and television broadcasts. Corporate representatives released the findings of an independent review. The review confirmed what the evidence had already revealed. Nathan's original submission had entered the development pipeline years earlier. Internal failures had allowed his work to be incorporated into later projects without proper attribution. New leadership changes were announced. Formal acknowledgments were issued. Corrective actions were outlined. Yet none of those announcements became the most memorable moment of the day. That moment arrived later. Near the end of the conference, a representative stepped to the podium and made a simple statement. "Today, we formally recognize Nathan Cole as the original creator of the core design architecture that helped shape this platform." No dramatic music followed. No applause was requested. No celebration was staged. Yet across the room, something remarkable happened. People stood, one by one at first, then dozens, then hundreds. Reporters, engineers, employees, investors. They rose quietly from their seats. Not because anyone instructed them to, because respect sometimes arrives without a script. Nathan had not planned to attend. In fact, he almost stayed home. But Ryan convinced him that some moments deserved witnesses. So there he stood near the side of the room, wearing the same modest jacket he had worn weeks earlier when security escorted him from the unveiling. The difference now was not the jacket. The difference was the truth. Nathan looked around the auditorium. Cameras pointed toward him. Reporters waited for a statement. The room gradually settled into silence. Ryan watched from the back. Claire stood nearby with folded hands. Emily sat beside her father, holding his arm proudly. A microphone was offered. Nathan accepted it. For a moment, he simply looked across the crowd. Then he spoke. I spent a long time believing this story was about a design. His voice remained calm, steady, honest. But I do not think it was ever really about a design. The room remained perfectly still. I think it was about character. About doing good work even when nobody notices. About telling the truth even when it would be easier not to. A few people lowered their eyes. Others nodded quietly. Nathan continued. I am grateful to everyone who followed the facts. I am grateful to the people who cared enough to ask questions. And I am especially grateful to my daughter. He looked toward Emily. Her eyes immediately filled with tears. Because she believed in me long before anyone else did. The room remained silent. Not an uncomfortable silence. Not an empty silence. The kind of silence that appears when people feel something deeper than words. Emily squeezed his hand. Nathan smiled. Then he stepped away from the microphone. No dramatic speech. No attack. No bitterness. No revenge. Just dignity. Quiet dignity. Months later, life settled into a new normal. Nathan received recognition for his work. New opportunities appeared. Consulting offers arrived. Engineering organizations invited him to speak. Yet perhaps the most meaningful change happened inside the garage behind his house. One evening, after finishing homework, Emily walked inside carrying a fresh notebook. She placed it on the workbench. What is that? Nathan asked. Emily grinned. My invention journal. Nathan laughed. Your invention journal? You always said ideas matter. She opened the first page. I figured somebody should start drawing the next big thing. Nathan looked around the garage. The same workbench. The same lights. The same walls covered with sketches. Yet somehow everything felt different. Not because success had finally arrived. Because hope had never left. Outside, the sun dipped below the horizon. Golden light filtered through the garage windows. Emily began sketching while Nathan watched quietly. And in that moment, the greatest reward was not recognition. It was knowing that truth had found its way home. If this story touched something in your heart, perhaps it is because all of us know what it feels like to be overlooked, underestimated, or forgotten. And perhaps we also know how powerful it is when kindness, character, and truth finally receive the respect they deserve. If you believe quiet strength still matters in this world, share where you are watching from and what part of Nathan's journey stayed with you the most. And if stories about dignity, second chances, and the good hidden inside ordinary people mean something to you, we would be honored to have you join us for the next one.